Good afternoon and evening, everyone. My name is Winston Zhang, and I'm an editor in the Tech in Asia Studios team. Thank you for joining us for today's online event on managing your career during the pandemic, presented by Tech in Asia Jobs, a leading jobs platform for finding tech and startup roles in Asia with over 40,000 job seekers on it. Please feel free to submit any questions you may have over the course of the discussion. Remember to do so in the questions tab, not the chat tab, all right? We will get to them at the end of the session. This event was also made possible by Tiger Hall. Tiger Hall is a success enablement platform that helps professionals achieve their career and life goals by learning directly from some of the region's most successful people. And in fact, it is through them that we have our guest for today, Syed Ali Abbas, Chief Strategy Officer at Epitome, a company that is focused on helping individuals as well as enterprises meet the robust workforce challenges of today. Hi, welcome Abbas.
Hey Winston, how are you?
Doing well. Could you please give us a brief introduction of yourself and Epitome?
Sure. So Epitome is basically a company that plays in the lifelong learning and talent analytics space. We build platforms which work for governments and for companies and educational systems to really help individuals take charge of their learning and career throughout their life, not just in school, not just at work, but right through their lives, right through their careers. I've been with Epitome for almost a year now. I'm leading strategy for them. I used to be on their advisory board before that, since they were founded. Before this, I was the global HR lead for a company called GFG, which is the parent of Zalora. And I've done a few other roles before that. Career HR professional, but also dabble a little bit in startup advisory, in angel investing. I sit on the council of the National HR Institute of Singapore and serve with AWA, which is one of our large social organizations.
Yes, exactly the kind of profile we need to give us the insights we're going to probably go into today. So let's get to it, shall we? Given what Epitome does, and in your experience as a leader in the HR space, what do you say career management? What does it mean today?
So I think it's a very interesting question, and it's something that we've sort of grappled with as a company. But before that, let me just go into it from an HR perspective, because I got into HR specifically from a career and employer branding perspective. So essentially, for most of us, we don't really have a big career plan when we start working. Our jobs come as a result of what we did in university. And what we do in university is because of what our parents did as a profession, or because there's some wise uncle or HR guy in our family circle who's the one who gives advice to everyone. And essentially we follow them, or the cute guy or girl who we knew in school is taking a particular course in NUS. So, we take the same course. And ultimately that's what happens, right? We take the program, we go into university, we get a bit of career counseling from the careers service and from our lecturers. But essentially what they're telling us is the jobs that people who were doing that program before did. They're not really there to give us a detailed, customized individual career plan. And then once we go into the world of work, the HR teams as well, they focus on training, and the career advice they give us is all within their own box. So it's their jobs in that company which fit the particular skill set I have at that time. And it's all very disconnected. So if you want to plan a long-term career, you want to make a career change, it's actually quite difficult. So from an Epitome perspective, we sort of identified this as the big problem we want to solve. And companies agree with us, and we've had those conversations, and we continue to have them. Like right now, just 2 weeks ago, we spoke to a European Fortune 500 company. They have 14 HR tech systems, the best of the best. And they're still not getting results in terms of long-term career progression and retention of their best staff, regardless of getting all those cool things that are out there in the market. So we've tried to figure this out, how do we do this? How don't we do this? And one of the opportunities we saw was that the people who can really do this at scale, who have a finger in the education and the world of work, is governments. So we started talking to governments, and what we found was governments actually understand what we are saying and they can do something about it. So In Malaysia, for example, we started working with Talent Corp in the Malaysian Ministry of Human Resources.
Yeah.
We did an initial pilot and surveyed 150,000 people for career and for their skills and so on and so forth. And firstly, the results were quite staggering, but also the demand that came after that for career services was even more staggering. So we had to train 300 and something career counselors to help the students. Something similar happened on a smaller scale in Singapore, where we are working with WSG and the Ministry of Manpower and other sort of national stakeholders like NTUC. And now, of course, because of COVID-19, we are accelerating our plans for larger sort of interventions with parties like this, and not just in Singapore and Malaysia, but in other countries.
Okay. So you brought up COVID-19, and obviously that's something that's affecting all of us at the moment. It's very challenging times that we're in. In Singapore, for example, right, total employment in the first quarter saw its sharpest drop since SARS in 2003, right? Or to take another market as an example, in Indonesia, the government predicts that 2.9 to 5.2 million people could lose their jobs during the outbreak. Given your past experience in pandemic planning, which is pretty specific, right? With AT&T, I understand. What are your thoughts on this current situation?
I mean, the reality is it's very difficult to predict this right now. So I went through SARS and H1N1. I was part of the team that built the pandemic plan for AT&T internationally, which today, by the way, is still used by the likes of IBM and Philips, not just AT&T. And it's very difficult to predict how this is going to go. The reality is the world is in a much better place than we were 15 years ago when SARS and H1N1 happened, financially, technologically, medically. But this is a very different kind of situation because SARS did not spread as fast. It actually did not have so much communicability in that sense. And the world was less prepared, but the scale of the problem was not as big either. So, I mean, the reality is we could have three scenarios. Optimistically, the current lockdowns around the world, we're lifting them. They end up being reasonably successful lifting. The virus is controlled by social distancing, etc. And in the next few months, we get a viable mass market treatment like the one Gilead is working on and vaccine, and it's available. That would be wonderful. The world will not, struggle so much. Yes, we will have a temporary setback at the individual level and company level, but life can come back to normal relatively quickly. I think the more pessimistic scenario is all of these things slow down, especially that there are waves of outbreaks when we lift lockdowns each time. And the vaccine and the drugs, it takes time to discover them, and it takes even more time to mass produce and mass distribute. That's when we start having a problem, because at that point you have a longer term impact on the movement of people and goods. That starts hitting companies, that starts hitting the financial services sector, commodities, physical goods, global supply chains, and it starts doing permanent damage to employment and economies. Right now, the damage is still relatively temporary, but the longer this goes on, the more the risk is that there will be permanent damage.
Okay, so, I mean, obviously we won't actually know the full extent until, well, a vaccine is developed. But for right now, in the course of your work so far, or with Epitomy's work, in this recent few months, are there certain trends or patterns that you've noticed? Like, for example, with startups, how have they been affected? How are they responding?
So I mean, we're not working directly with startups on their sort of employability and career issues, because right now we're focused on the government and enterprise sector. But definitely there are peers, and we are ourselves a startup, right? And we also have sort of a lot of our friends working in startups. And also as a sort of beginner angel investor, I have a couple of my portfolio companies that are going through this along with us. So I'll give you some broad thoughts based on that, as well as having just worked with startups for the past few years. So I think, there are obviously impacts. So we can see that, and this is covered in Tech in Asia as well, right? So Stocko, Hook, couple of companies have closed down. I think Hook was for reasons other than COVID-19, but we can already see the pressure on some smaller startups. The big guys have done some cuts and fundraising. So Airbnb is the biggest example. Uber is changing a lot of things. Grab is doing a few things. There are some strategic pivots that are happening in terms of model. So Oyo is doing that. Zilingo is doing that already, because they know that if things go a bit longer like this, they will struggle quite substantially.
Yes.
So they're doing their risk management now and changing their plans. And even companies like Grab, which are so well funded, well run, even they are now going to the point where they're suggesting to employees, unpaid leave, management taking pay cuts, cost control measures, etc.
Yes, yes. All this just to, a lot of it is, you feel, is in case, right? Because we don't know when this will end.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there are companies, even smaller companies, which are sort of at the angel seed series A level, who are still getting funding at this point, right? So in Hong Kong, recently, Zooblue, which is actually in the travel space and tourism space, interestingly, they have actually got funding at this time. Obviously,
Okay.
we are here because of Tiger Hall. Tiger Hall got funded by Sequoia right now. In Indonesia, Rara Delivery, which is in the e-commerce logistics space, just got funding with 500 startups and a few other people. Engage Rocket, in my HR tech favorite space, a Singaporean company, they got their funding with Qualgrow. So there are people also picking up funding. I think the key thing is that the smartest founders and teams have already sort of taken quick action on controlling their cash burn and to make sure that their business model is right based on whatever scenarios come up. And that's why those are the people who are likely to survive and thrive. So it's cutting out discretionary expenses like travel, working out payment plans with vendors, cutting sales and marketing activities, yes,
Right.
cutting some training, pay cuts, redundancies even in some cases, closure of business units, fundraising, all these things are happening. And this is a good thing because we should do this right now, because if this continues for a while, cash is going to be king. So conserving cash is very clear. I was speaking yesterday, well, not speaking, listening, because the person is much smarter than me, to the managing partner of one of the biggest VCs in ASEAN, early stage. And he basically said in his portfolio, what he recommends as an ideal scenario for startups is 12 months of cash burn, because that gives them enough time to pivot and figure things out based on what happens.
Okay. So you've mentioned a few individual cases and across a few different industries. But have you noticed whether there are actually some sectors that are still doing fine, or maybe even better than in normal times?
Yeah, I mean, let's segregate it a bit.
Sure.
Let's look at who's doing not so well, because then it makes it very easy to see who's doing so well. So who's not doing well? I mean, a very simple way to look at it, and I think I read this somewhere, but I can't remember, so I can't give credit to the person, my apologies, is that if your business model relies on people going from point A to point B, or coming together to do some activity, you have a problem.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's kind of obvious. So F&B outlets, cinema halls, retail outlets, mall operators, office and co-working space operators, universities and schools, travel operators, airlines, taxis, ride sharing, hotels,
Yes.
manufacturing plants, all of these guys have a problem. Right? So you take the opposite scenario of that. If you can do things without people getting together or without traveling from point A to point B, then you're in a sweet spot. So food delivery, audio and video streaming, e-commerce retail, e-commerce logistics, drones, smart mobility, remote working, online learning and education, thank you, biotech, remote healthcare, online payment, virtualization, crypto, cybersecurity, and of course, to keep all of this running, telecom companies and data center companies.
Okay. So it's as simple as dividing between who's bringing people together and who's helping them to function well apart.
For now, where it gets interesting is you're going to have a change if this continues for a while, because what's going to happen is the forces of globalization that tie us together and the supply chains that are built on that are going to start to get disrupted. Also, the financial system will get disrupted. So then what you start to see is there will be a trend towards more localization. So then suddenly your local agriculture person, the guy who's got a farm on top of some warehouse in Singapore or in Kranji, or the person who's doing fish farming, or the person who's got a manufacturing plant in Singapore, which can be repurposed to manufacture basic goods. Those people and the local hospitals and healthcare providers and pharmacies and medication of manufacturers are all going to benefit substantially, because then what will happen is the logistics gets disrupted. So you have to start to become a bit more self-sufficient, which is not great news for countries like Singapore, right? Because we don't have a lot of things here. So we will have to repurpose a lot of stuff that we're doing and rely less on ships bringing stuff to us.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about sectors in general. So on the employer side of things, right? Do you notice whether there have been any shifts in how they evaluate potential hires?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I've had a few conversations with companies which and headhunters, search firms, I should call them. So I think from a skills perspective, right? Especially the sort of general sort of what kind of person do we need for this kind of job? There's not a huge difference right now, right? Because we only sort of 2 or 3 months into this disruption.
Yeah.
I think that will change over time, but right now there's not a huge change on that. What is changing is that there's a change in terms of obviously the way people are hired. So there's a lot of video interviewing. I just heard a case from a friend of mine recently who works in the search business. He is based in Singapore. He hired an American person for a company in Hong Kong, and everything was done virtually.
Okay.
So the person is now starting on a fixed term contract in the US because they can't move to Hong Kong physically. And then once, the lockdown and the flights all get resolved, then the person will fly in to take the permanent role in Hong Kong. So this stuff is already happening. Technology makes it possible. There are, of course, people who say, maybe it's not great that you can't meet the candidate face to face, so you don't really get to know them, but that's, people are making do. One of the things which is very interesting that comes to mind because of this is that one big area that has been impacted in terms of looking at candidates, people are looking at foreign candidates differently. And foreign candidates are looking at jobs in the local companies differently. So here's the challenge, right? Even right now, obviously, there's the obvious logistical pain of somebody sitting in another country, like the example I gave you. The company was, and the candidate were open-minded enough to do it. Okay. But a lot of times, are you really going to think about hiring a person for a job you need now, and you're not sure when they can fly over to you, and you're not really sure how quickly you'll get their visa done, how they will settle down in this period, how you're going to onboard them, can they start remotely or not? It doesn't work for every company.
Yeah.
But also, as you go forward, it becomes very tricky in other ways. So companies now, if this continues, are increasingly going to start to ask their staff to take pay cuts on paid leave, right? We are living in Singapore. Out here, the local population, actually, most of them, a substantial percentage own their own home, right? HDB or condo, whatever, but they own their own home. The foreigners primarily are renting.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're a person who is on a work permit or an S pass, you're on low salary, you're already renting, then you're living in a country like Singapore with all the expenses that involves, then you get to take a pay cut of 20%. The margins are not there for you to survive. So you will start to see some of those people in current companies and current jobs actually asking to go back to their home countries and telecommute while this is going on. And for other people coming from low-cost countries on low salaries who don't have a lot of savings to tide them through a tough few months, they might not want to take the risk, and companies might not also want to take the risk. Now, the interesting thing is this also repeats at the top end of the spectrum, because expatriates who are coming here with nice benefits and housing support and all those things, companies are not really in the mood to subsidize your condo in River Valley right now.
Yes.
For $7,000 rent per month. So that's not going to happen as well. So it is a very tricky scenario right now for foreign workers. And to complicate things, obviously, the government, rightly so, is giving subsidies if you continue to have local employees on your payroll and pay their CPF. So then the cost of local employees goes down substantially compared to foreign employees who are not subsidized. So employers are also incentivized to hire local right now by the Singapore government and a few others.
Okay. How about, okay, now let's look at a little bit of a silver lining in this cloud. Are there some roles that are actually surprisingly so resilient, or even have turned out to be pretty essential during these times? Obviously, aside from healthcare and frontline workers, but are there some roles that you didn't expect it, but they're actually pretty resilient?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, as you said, the essential services will continue, right? And in the case of a lot of other sectors, life goes on. So it's not that, the world is stopping. So people are still needed. I think that the challenge is that what you will see is a squeeze being applied on the discretionary roles, which are more variable based on demand. So if you actually have a business that is driven by travel, then obviously if there are not enough travelers, not enough hotel bookings, not enough flights, you don't need all the people to book those tickets or sell those experiences. You also don't need the customer service to actually take care of the customer issues in that sector, because there just aren't that many customers.
Yeah.
Now, I think the tricky part about this is, yes, the amazing developers and the amazing marketers and of course the amazing HR guys are very much in demand always, right? But here's the reality. I think there is a sort of situation in this pandemic compared to the financial crisis before SARS, where it's not just the work that you do and who you are that drives your job security. It is also what industry you're in. So you may be working for the best of the best in travel, Airbnb, booking.com, etc. And you may be one of the best people, but if they have to pivot and they have to cut their workforce, you don't have job security.
That's true.
You could be working for NTUC, in the income side, on the insurance side, or you could be working on fair price. And you know what? There's huge demand for what you're doing. So you may not have the most specialist skills, but you're in a sector like grocery, general merchants, e-commerce, where people have to grow rather than reduce. So you actually have more job security than usual. So a lot of it this time, strangely enough, and we're not used to this, is actually sector dependent rather than just company or job dependent.
Okay. So talking about sectors, does it also apply to startups? Like, would you say that a startup is the best place right now for someone to shape their career? And how does it figure into the whole planning for career progression?
So I think I'll address it in two ways, right? One is startups in general as a place to be today and what that means. And the second is startups from a career perspective, right? So we have the full context. So from the perspective of startups, right? I think startups, they are right now traveling through uncertain times because startups by definition don't have a lot of cash reserves most of the time. I'm generalizing. And most of the time they're burning some cash to scale, right? So by definition, a startup has less runway in terms of cash burn than a mature company.
Yes.
This is generalization, but these things are very finely balanced. So if I don't know if you've been around long enough because you look so young, but I have. If you remember 2016, which is not that far ago, there was a crisis of confidence in e-commerce companies. And that completely shook the market. Lazada and Redmart got sold to Alibaba. Coupang had to raise emergency funding. Flipkart lost their valuation substantially. Snapdeal in India declined. All sorts of chaos happened at that point, right? To good companies, just because the investors stopped giving them money for a period of 6 to 12 months. So right now is actually difficult because investors are again on the sidelines. There are good companies raising funds, as I said, but the investors on the sidelines waiting to see what happens for the next couple of months. So this is the point, if you have a very high burn rate and you're not smart enough to reduce it, you could get into trouble as a startup. Now, that is talking about the broad context. Now, when you actually start talking about career in a startup, I mean, it really depends, right? I mean, these are extraordinary times. I would not judge careers in any type of company or industry based on this. I mean, I've worked in a Fortune 500 listed company, which was 100 plus years old. I worked in a private equity company, which was an Asian mid-size sort of tech company. I worked in a VC-owned unicorn, which went IPO. And now I'm working in a startup with less than 50 people, which is pre-Series A, right? All of them have their pros and cons. I think if you think about right now and you're very risk averse, you could say, yeah, maybe startups may not be the greatest place to be from a job security perspective. But if you're actually talking about overall, I think it's pros and cons, right? So you think about it. You in the corporate world, you're going to get structure. You're going to learn from a number of experienced mentors and colleagues. You are going to get investment in your training and your financial well-being, whether it's through insurance, pension, benefits, etc.
Yeah.
But you're a cog in a big machine. You get bogged down in bureaucracy, and you have limited freedom to experiment. Flip it around. Startups, lots of freedom, lots of visibility, lots of hands-on learning, but you're always firefighting. Your mentors are people who are still figuring things out themselves, because this may be their first startup or second startup, and they're still sort of early in their career, and the company does not give you a high salary. You don't get a lot of insurance, pension. You don't get formal training. Everything is hands-on. So it's horses for courses. I've seen employees leave really good startups because they just couldn't stand the constant change and the lack of a defined career path. And I've seen employees leave corporates because nothing changes and they're sick of it, right? So it could be either way. As they say, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
So it's very much on the individual, up to the individual preference and what they feel comfortable with, yes?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So, right. So on that note, on the individual level, with this discussion we're having today, I feel it's very important that the audience is able to come away with tips and advice that they can act on immediately, right? As on the individual level, on their own. So on that level, as the individual job seeker, as the individual employee, how do I start my career planning journey?
Got it. Perfect. And I can see a few questions here. And just to the audience, and Winston, if you agree, we'll address the questions closer to the end, because some of the comments here and the conversation here will already be covering some of those points. Is that okay?
That's at the end.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. Catch you at the end. So we're talking about career planning journeys, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think from a career, long-term career perspective, right? It's all about what you want out of life. So your career and your job is just one aspect of who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And you need to sort of incorporate into that discussion or that thought process in your mind what you want out of life, what your family is all about and what they want, your sort of financial aspirations, what you can do, your skills, hard and soft, what makes you happy, and other such things. Yeah. And then you get that big picture, because you can have a great career, but if you're not happy, your family life is not good, you're not making enough money to pay your bills, a job is not going to help you. I know the CTO or former CTO of one very successful startup in Singapore, who pretty much everyone on this call will know if they're from the startup world and even otherwise. He actually quit after many years in that startup, after it got to many rounds of funding. And I knew the person personally for a long time. Mm-hmm. He actually quit and left the startup and just gave up. And do you know why? It's because the startup was being very fiscally conservative. Mm-hmm. They had raised money, but they were being smart about it. So in a way, even after being very successful for many years, they were continuing to bootstrap.
Okay.
In Singapore, right? And the investors also wanted them to bootstrap. Guess what happened? The guy was telling me that, look, I have enough money in a month, even though I'm the CTO of a successful startup with tier 1 investors, I only have enough money every month after I pay my rent to either go for networking and career and work-related activities, or to take my girlfriend out and show her a good time. I don't have money for both. This is not a choice anyone should have to make.
Right. Yes.
Right? So you need to understand that, sometimes the startup life is glamorized, and sometimes the corporate life is glamorized, but both of them have their pros and cons. And you have to look at the various factors of what's important to you and then take a call. Yeah. So the way I look at it, right? And this is advice I give to everyone and I apply it to myself. Once you sort of go through that big picture conversation and you think about potential career paths, don't pick one and fixate on it, right? Look at it in its totality. Okay. And pick a few different things, because what you need in life is to have multiple options open, right? Essentially, what's happened with careers nowadays is they're not like, what our parents had, where you go to one company, you pick one profession, you do one kind of job. It's a 35-year marathon. You might do it in 2 or 3 companies or just one, but it is what it is. You are the procurement manager for a big tech company for your entire freaking career, right? That's not the case anymore. People, whether they want to do it or whether their companies force them out at some point, are increasingly doing multiple short career tracks. It's like a series of sprints rather than a marathon.
Okay.
right? So because of that, you always need to have multiple options. You always focus on the one you're in right now, but the others should be nicely bubbling up on the rear burner of the stove, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that gives you the optionality to switch tracks when you're feeling jaded with your current career track, or if you're made redundant and you have to start from scratch because things are just not going to work out, right? If you're a 45-year-old salesperson in a mature sector which is not growing, then it's quite likely that it will take you a very long time to find another job, or you might never find another one that pays as well as your current one ever again.
Mm.
Right? 45, 50, 55, because that's the point where age starts to play a factor.
Yeah.
Unfairly, but it does. Right?
Yes.
That's just a fact of life. So you need to have all that stuff in your hand, but you don't start it at that point. You start it early in your career
Mm.
so that you can actually work on your alternate career or your side hustle well in advance, and you can actually help it get to the point where you can switch to it with less pain when you need it.
Okay.
Right? So I'll keep going on this track because I think this is very important for people to understand, and especially because the people who are on this call today are interested in this. So I really want to share this with them. So once you've identified those career options, you don't put them on a piece of paper on the back of your mind and say, okay, I'm just going to do a webinar, or I'm going to go to Udemy and do a course, or I'll log into General Assembly or SG Innovate or whatever and pick something. You need to be more proactive and you need to road test that. So first you want to go out and discuss and network with people in that space, or people who are your friends who can introduce you to people in that space, to understand if it's the right fit for you, what it involves, and what it sort of actually means to be in that space, right? What is a career as a public speaker? What is a career as a data scientist? The reality is a data analyst and data scientist are two completely different things. If you take a couple of courses and pay a few $1,000s over a couple of weeks, you're going to become a data analyst. A data analyst spends their time crunching numbers on Excel sheets and ClickView and other software. A data scientist understands how data works, can create algorithms that can make the data sing and tell a story. They're completely different things. They're paid completely differently. The work is completely different, right? And a lot of people in the market don't understand that today. So you have to go out there, have the conversation, and understand it from people in that profession or in that field. You also need to see if you can find a way to get a psychometric or skills assessment. There are people who offer it free. There are people who you will have to pay for it. Try to figure out some way to get it. Your current company might be doing something which you should volunteer for to test, and so on and so forth, right? So that is all stuff that you need to think about. And then specifically for startup entrepreneurs and people who are thinking about being a founder, you need to really have a conversation with yourself and have self-awareness that do you really have that combination of personality, domain expertise, mental strength, resilience, risk-taking personality and ability to become a founder and stay the course through the years and years of hard work it takes for little reward to really be successful.
Okay. So yeah, go on.
So last thought on this,
Yep.
And I wanted to make this real for everyone. So once you have those options in place, you maintain them as a sort of career portfolio. You keep upskilling, you keep building a network, you keep joining the relevant communities, you build your personal brand, and you get involved, whether it's through mentoring or projects or whatever. So my personal example, I've been an HR leader for most of my career. But over the years, I've tried to build some sort of reputation and branding for myself in the HR tech space as a sort of startup advisor on people issues, strategy issues, and HR tech issues, and then started to be a very amateur beginner angel investor with a very small portfolio. So live example for you and the audience, Epitome, I actually started advising. I met one of the founders of Epitome more than a decade ago in a pool party.
Okay.
Then when he and his co-founders were looking to found Epitome and they had the idea in 2016, I actually was brought in to help them advise, just, not paid for anything, just, as a friendly advisor. Once the company was founded, I was asked to join the advisory board. And once I got free from GFG, when it IPO'd last year, the team actually said, hey, we're doing a strategy pivot. We're doing a lot of other things. We'd love to have a corporate kind of person join us who could fill a couple of the gaps in our team. Would you like to join? And look at me now. I'm full-time, happily working in a company where I met the founder over a drink 10 years ago.
Yeah. I guess it's all about like sowing the seeds, and you never know where they might take you from there, right?
Exactly.
So you have brought up about, people who have this entrepreneurial kind of ambitions. They want to start their own company. I would say that, and please correct me if I'm wrong or add to the list, but that's one group of three that we're looking at the moment for regarding this discussion we're having today. Another group is one that is currently employed, okay? And a third one is those who are looking for new jobs, either because they've unfortunately recently lost their job, or are zigging while others are zagging and trying to find a new job in this environment, even though they are currently employed. So let's talk about those who are currently employed first, right? What can they do to safeguard themselves?
Got it. So I think absolutely right. I mean, it makes no sense to have a long-term career plan if you lose your job today and can't pay your rent, right? So I think this is absolutely right. I think, firstly, I think the defensive action you can take is to just do your job well today, right? Because things like, entire industries suffering from a demand crisis, your company having to cut jobs or request people to take pay cuts, some of these things we cannot control, right?
Yep.
But what we can control is how we are at work today and how much of ourselves we are giving to our company and to our job. So if you're the kind of person who says, I'm going to roll up my sleeves, I'm going to volunteer, we're all in this together, we're all going to, come out of this together, we're going to fight. Yes, I'm willing to make a couple of sacrifices for the sake of the company and the team, and I'm going to roll up my sleeves and contribute in areas where I don't usually work, but the team needs it right now. That's the right attitude to have. If you're the person who can't look past your job description, or is complaining, or is fighting it when a company has to take hard decisions, because remember, for founders and startups, it's a terrible moment when they have to tell their team that they have to take a pay cut.
Yeah.
Or one of them has to leave, because startups are small. You're all like family, or at least like a tribe, right? So nobody wants to do that. So if you're going to be the person who raises their hand at that point, says, no, I don't want to do it, it just makes it more difficult for them, right? But conversely, when they have to figure out who's the person who's not a team player who would be the easiest to let go, guess who just self-nominated themselves, right? And this is just a fact of life, right? Because people will remember what you do today for a long, long time, right? The second thing is you take defensive action, assuming the worst case scenario happens, that you lose your job, right? And we'll talk a bit more about that, but essentially you do all the things you need to do to prepare to go onto the job market and find a role.
Okay.
Right? And finally, longer term, always have that career portfolio that I mentioned in the back of your book.
Okay. So given that, let's say this second group, the group that I mentioned before about people who are actually looking for new jobs right now, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so I'll spend a bit of time on this. So I think, firstly, if you lose your job right now, the first thing to do is don't panic, don't get depressed. As I said, the career and the job are just one part of your life. There's a whole other part of your life, 10 other parts of your life that are still going on, right? So calm down, take the time to, get some quiet time, think about all the other good stuff in your life, absorb the job loss as a temporary setback, discuss it with the people who are close to you in your life. Don't hide it. Don't be the person who gets ready for work and does conference calls pretending you're still at work, like they show in comedy. Don't do that. Speak to your loved ones, because the stress of not telling them is as bad as the stress of losing the job. So tell them immediately, get that load off your shoulder, get that load off your mind. Second thing, financial stress is a terrible thing. So look at your numbers, look at the bills, if you have an unemployment insurance, if you're lucky enough to have it, activate it. Make sure you're meeting your numbers from your financial savings versus your spend, right? So you have control of your finances. That's very important for you to then be able to take control of your career as a next step. Next step now, you start looking at what options you have in the current sort of career you have, and the other couple of career options hopefully you've been preparing for in some way or the other. Even if you haven't, it's okay. You can do that. Number 4, get out there, be visible, talk to people in your network, talk to your colleagues, grab new opportunities to showcase yourself, whether it's just a LinkedIn comment or volunteering for a webinar, writing a blog. A lot of hiring is done by network and personal referral. And this is only going to accelerate in times like this, because people don't have that assurance of being able to interview people face to face quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, the network matters, right? Then don't lose hope. So there are still a lot of companies hiring.
Mm.
What is important to remember is right now, temporarily, there will be more people and applicants than jobs.
Yeah.
So you need to move fast. If you hear about an opportunity, you see a job ad online, jump at it right at that point, even if it's at like 12 o'clock at night after you just finished binge watching something on Netflix and you're really tired, apply at that time, because you never know, there could be a number of other people who apply and a decision gets taken in the next 24 to 48 hours because the company is looking for someone urgently, right? Very important. Then also, don't be picky. So yes, we all want the perfect job. We want the perfect pay package, the perfect company. We want a permanent employment in most cases, unless we love freelancing. If you get a contract job at a not great pay scale, take it. It'll pay the bills. It's temporary. That's okay. You'll get exposed to a new company, new set of skills. It's a positive in the long run, even though you may not love it. And do your best in that job. Don't show up as if you're doing them a favor because you took a pay cut. It's okay. They're doing something good for you, so you do something good for them. And finally, don't get sucked into a sort of black hole of stress and just being focused on the job search. As I said, there is other stuff in life. So look at other ways to upskill yourself, reskill yourself. As I said, Udemy, General Assembly, SG Innovate. There's so much good stuff out there. Tiger Hall is there now. Even if you're not learning that way, go and mentor another startup. Go and mentor a younger person. Go and mentor somebody in your family or your friends. Spend quality time with family. Eat some good food. Get some sleep. Catch up on the book you never read. Take a long walk. Look at the flowers in the botanical gardens. Do whatever, right? But don't get sucked into the cycle where you're sitting in your shorts, looking scruffy, and 24 hours a day hitting refresh on LinkedIn and Indeed and Glassdoor. Live life. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. That's pretty much the experience I had before and advice I had before as well. Like, it's very important. I made it a point when there was a point of time I was still looking around for jobs when I was unemployed. I made it a point to go for a run every day. So keeping up with exercise, keeping up with your own personal, mental, and physical well-being, I think it's very important. It's underrated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so looking ahead, how do you envision the job market evolving over the rest of this year and into 2021 and even beyond that?
Good question. It's a tough one. I think, so there's going to be, in my opinion, I don't think this is something we're going to dig ourselves out of as a economy, as a set of companies, as a group of people. This pandemic is not going to be something that we'll get rid of very easily. So there will be some lingering after effects for sure. So I think over the next 12 months, we should definitely expect that there will be more job losses.
Okay.
There will be some companies that will go bankrupt, not just startups, but big ones. We've seen some of the oil traders in Singapore struggling a lot these days. This is just a fact of life because a lot of the economies are built on consumption and debt. And when consumption dries up because of this pandemic, companies don't have the revenue to service their debt.
Yes.
That's just a fact of life. So that's going to happen. I think companies, and I saw this was already a question from one of the people in the Q&A. Actually, it was from Willis. So Willis, to answer your question, yes, I think there will definitely be a rethinking of jobs and salaries. So there will be some relooking at salaries because there has been some pretty crazy numbers floating around just because the competition was so intense at the moment between all the startups and all the tech companies and all the mature companies digitizing, that some skill sets, there was just chaos and it was just, winner takes all and people are throwing really big numbers around, especially in hotspots like Silicon Valley, a little bit in London, a little bit in Israel, a little bit in Bangalore, a little bit in Singapore, and so on and so forth. And China as well, for sure, is now creeping up fast on that with some crazy numbers being thrown around. So there will be a reckoning there and a resettling there. But also in terms of jobs, I suspect we will see that there may be less permanent jobs created and there may be more contract jobs created over time. That's great news for people who like to freelance and like the freedom of that.
Right.
But I would caution people that the gig economy is a bit overrated and overhyped. especially for younger people, it makes a lot of sense in your 20s and 30s to do gig economy and freelance roles. But once you get to a certain stage in life where, you can't do a lot of those gig economy roles again and again, or you don't get them offered to you at a higher pay, which is your burn rate once you have a kid, and you're sending them to school or something like that.
Yes.
And you then don't get medical insurance in those gig economy companies, and you don't get a lot of other benefits. You don't have a pension plan. Things start to get a bit tight financially. So be careful of everything the gig economy promises you, because a lot of the times the people who are bigging it up are people who are benefiting from the gig economy. I'm not going to take names, but we know who they are, right? There will be a lot more automation of work. There will be a lot more digitization, because mature companies are now being forced into digitizing because of this.
Yes.
Their business continuity plans don't work because they can't work remotely. That's what they've discovered now. There will be a lot more remote work. That will also change how offices and co-working spaces are set up. Jobs in general, you might see some impacts in terms of, as I said, firstly, more contract roles, outsourcing roles, more entrepreneurs having the chance and freelancers having the chance to fill in the gaps, more remote work, transactions being done remotely, like contract signatures, which people were hesitant to do in this part of the world before, unlike Europe and US. Less business travel, definitely less business class on SQ, less events, especially in expensive hotels, and rooms in expensive hotels. Changes to company structures and roles. Maybe instead of a lot of globalization, you might see a retreat to a lot more localization, because supply chains get broken up for some time because of risk management, and a lot more focus on BCP, travel reporting, safety. But all this stuff is going to happen. I think the key thing to remember is, ultimately, if you are upskilling, reskilling yourself, if you have an agile mindset, if you're able to keep up with changes, if you understand how to use technology, and not be a slave to technology, if you have the mentality of rolling up your sleeves and saying, let's do something new because that's what's needed today, or that's what I need to do to be successful in my job, then you're going to be okay. I mean, there's that whole article that's been going around I hate that. There's this couple of guys, academics in the UK, came out with this whole thing of 48% of jobs in the US are going to disappear because they're going to be automated. That's BS. And in fact, one of the two guys who wrote that study, Carl Benedict Fry, he finally admitted last year that that's BS. Right? That's not the case. People are not going to go away. We're still going to be there. What's going to happen is we need to be better at using technology to get better at our jobs, to learn things faster, and to switch or tweak our career progression and our jobs over time.
Okay. Well, it's about time for the question and answer portion. So thank you to everyone who submitted a question or three. And feel free to keep doing so, by the way. Remember, question tab, not the chat tab. Also, if you happen to see any question that someone else posted that you would like to have answered as well, do upvote the question so we can get to it, can see it easier. Let's go to the next question. Something from the fresh grad point of view, a question from Stephanie. Any advice for job seeking, especially for fresh graduates?
I think, so there's good news and bad news, right? The good news is this is a good time where people are going to be looking at people who can join the company and be generalists, right? So fresh graduates are perfect for coming in as an intern or a management trainee or in an entry-level job, and you can do your core skill, but you can also run around and do other things. You have the energy for it. You're willing to learn, hopefully, and you don't have a big ego, which always helps. So, I think that is great for fresh graduates, and it will help, right? The one piece of bad news I have for fresh graduates, research of previous recessions usually shows that if you enter the job market at the time of a recession, your starting salary is lower because companies don't pay as much. And because of that, your salary over time, if you have a normal career progression, is also lower than people who have graduated outside a recession. So what you will have to do over time is don't run around and start looking for a job as soon as the recession opens up and conditions normalize. So don't run around and do that. If you love your job and company, it's okay to not earn a lot of money initially, but then it becomes even more important to do the career portfolio exercise that I told you, to make sure that you're making yourself ready to pick something when you're ready to pick something new, and increase your earning power or change what you're doing or have options at least in hand.
Okay. That's a good one. Let's move on to another one. Let's take a look at Max's question. So basically, you've mentioned before about how jobs can be expected to change, more contract roles, more remote, more digitization, and so on. So this one very specifically asks, like, with work from home situations being more common, is it something that we can expect the demand for when you're looking for a new job, especially when you're starting a new family, for those kinds of considerations?
Interesting question. I mean, at the moment, the default answer is yes, because everyone has to work from home.
Yes.
Going forward, I think companies will be more open to work from home. At the same time, I think work from home on a permanent basis is a new concept in Asia. It's very common in Australia, very common in the UK, very common in the US and in Europe. Work from home is something that employers and especially managers are still getting used to right now. So yes, people will agree, but doing it on a permanent basis, on a full-time basis, I think there will be some hesitancy. And by the way, there is a reason for that. A lot of people actually talk about this work from home concept as something that is leading to higher productivity, et cetera, especially in the US. Quite frankly, a lot of them were just doing it for real estate cost savings, right? Let's be honest about it. And actually, some people positioned it as a family-friendly sort of thing, but there was research done in a number of companies, and most clearly, I remember at Yahoo during the time Marissa Mayer was there after she'd left Google, and actually, work from home reduces productivity. So if you're in a company that supports you working from home because you have a new family or starting a new family, or you have a young kid, and both of you are working, and one of you cannot work from home, so the other should ideally before they go to school, I think the best companies will support you, because those are the companies which will keep their employees happy and productive in future. But there will be some companies who may reasonably say, I'm okay with you doing it for a while. When your child is born, do it for a few months, but I'm not okay with you doing it forever.
Right.
So it's a mixed bag, and there are pros and cons on both sides.
Okay. Thank you, Max, for that. We have two questions here that are a little bit similar. So Christine asks, with COVID-19 likely to become a new normal for now, right? Do you see any shift in the demand and supply between freelance and part-time positions versus full-time? And also there was another question about a freelancer mother who is thinking to go back into full-time work or to start human development digital business. How do they go about this?
Nice. So I think for Christine's question, I think I already talked about it a little bit, right? So I think definitely I expect to see more freelance and contract opportunities out there, at least in the next 12 to 24 months. And I think this is definitely something we need to get used to, both as employers and as employees, right? Or as contractors and partners and service providers. And again, there are pros and cons. It depends on what you want in life and whether that works for you or not, right? Now, in the case of Christine's question, going back to full-time work or starting a new business, I mean, if you go back to full-time work, I think it obviously gives you the security that you need of a regular paycheck and the benefits and all that other stuff, because your question started with in this unstable condition. So I'm assuming it comes from a place of wanting stability. Yeah. So then I would definitely go with the full-time work rather than starting your own business. Because if you're feeling unstable already, the last thing you need to do is start a business where you have to pump more money and time without seeing a lot of returns immediately in that. But that's just my personal view, because I'm, obviously somebody who spent a lot of time in the corporate world. So I have a bias towards stability. But I mean, if you really feel you have a human development business that you can start, and you have customers that will generate revenue quickly, maybe within your network immediately, why not? But I would always advise you, being an entrepreneur is not as easy or glamorous as it looks from the outside. And doing that in the middle of a recession, when people are going to spend less money on exactly the kind of things you want to start a company in is not the ideal timing, in my opinion.
Okay. Let's finish with one last one, something a little bit more encouraging, right? What from Johalia, what is the best career advice that you've ever gotten or heard that has helped you throughout your whole career?
Oh, that's a tough one. I've had many great bosses and mentors, so I'm trying to flip through the cards to pick the best one. I think for me, one of the best pieces of advice I got was actually, so I'm a very transparent, open person, right? And I have likes and dislikes just like anyone else. And I sort of have always spoken my mind. Uh, it has helped me in some cases where I have been in a company where I was supported, and actually that accelerated my progression over the years.
Yeah.
And I moved up very fast because I was the person willing to speak my mind, and people appreciated that. But it has also hurt me where in a specific scenario where I went in and I saw some things that were not the right things, I raised them, and immediately it put me into conflict with the people who were the powers that be in that company, and that did not work out very well. But the bottom line is, if I look back at everything, I still stick by the advice that I got from my mentor way back in AT&T. My first boss, who was actually, interestingly enough, a Singaporean, and who actually convinced me to move to Singapore with the company. He basically said, look, life is too short to not be yourself. So always put yourself, temporarily you can be in a situation where you suck it up because the situation is bad, or there's a paycheck you need, or because, there's a certain kind of work that you hate doing, but you need to do it because the team needs you to do it. But don't put yourself in a situation which is against your values and your nature and sort of your ethics. And if you see a situation like that, stand up to it, and be ready to walk out if that happens, even if the price will be quite high. So even in this situation of a pandemic, I would advise people that, there is difficulties in finding new jobs. Job security is tricky. You really don't want to quit your job on a whim, or just because somebody said something that, made you unhappy, or you had a boss who had a really tough conversation with you and gave you feedback, which was actually just shouting at you for 15 minutes. Don't quit because of that. But if you see something that is harassment, unethical dealing, and you can see that it's coming from a person who is not in a frame of mind where they're doing the right thing, stand up. And don't be afraid to be yourself and to stand up for the right thing, because I think some things will not change, whether there's a pandemic or not. Some things are just right and some things are just wrong. So don't sacrifice who you are for the sake of a paycheck.
Okay, that's a very encouraging note on which to end. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. So thank you to everyone for tuning in and for submitting your questions. I hope you found today's session helpful. Thank you, of course, to Abbas for joining us today, providing your insights and experience on the matter at hand.
My pleasure.
Yeah, just before you leave, what are you doing these days? What are you looking most forward to doing after the circuit breaker is over?
Oh, at the moment, I'm putting on weight, as I think everyone is. And the reintroduction of bubble tea in Singapore is not going to help that. But just looking forward to sort of being out and about, meeting friends, meeting my colleagues from work at Epitome, and meeting all the different people over a nice meal, because that's what we do in Singapore. And just hopefully life gets back to normal for everyone really soon. And I wish everyone good luck, good health, happiness, and great careers.
Okay, thank you once again.
Thank you.
I would just like to end with a short note regarding Tech in Asia jobs. I mentioned at the top that the platform has over 40,000 enthusiastic job seekers. Well, on the other side of the coin, there are also hundreds of startups using the platform to hire, even during these difficult times. So do check it out, create a profile, and you never know, you could find your next dream role on there. You can find a link to the platform on the chat tab, so do check that out. With that, stay safe, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us, and have a good evening ahead.
Thank you.